Hello, and welcome to Artbeat, a monthly podcast where we get to hear directly from artists and creatives about the inner workings of their practice, what challenges they face as a creative in today's world, and a few fun details along the way. If you're new here, welcome. I would love to hear what you think of today's episode in the feedback and comments below. Please leave a rating, a comment, follow, like, and subscribe. You can find Artbeat on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and Instagram. Today I'm excited to speak with Glen Gauthier, a collage and mixed media artist, graphic designer, and creative director. Glen is a Louisiana native living and working in Dallas, Texas. He's shown his works nationally and internationally, and on today's episode I'm excited to hear more about a new and more personal series that he's been working on. So let's dive in. Very excited to have you on. And just to start off the conversation, why don't you give a little introduction, who you are, what you do, tell us a little bit about the art that you make.
I've been an artist for probably the past 15 or so years. I'm in the advertising industry, so I've been a creative director and art director for, a really long time. And the goal for me is at some point to let art be the full-time thing. So what I'm doing now is I'm just having a real good time in the studio, creating a lot of work in a lot of different directions. And the cool thing is that I am able to channel a lot of that stuff into more personal directions, especially these last few years. And I'm most excited about that and what that has for the future.
That's exciting. Speaking as an artist myself, I feel like for a long time, when you get started, you are just creating and you're exploring.
Oh, yeah.
And it seems like once you start tapping into those more personal areas, that's kind of when you hit it. So that's
exactly
great that you're in that era.
Yeah. And probably what I should have said up front is I'm a collage artist. So with that, there's a lot of physical, handwork that gets done. And I've been doing that for so long, it's like second nature for me. And the idea of creating personal stuff out of that, there are times when it can be a challenge. And I found that a lot of my work was personal, even though I didn't realize it going into it. And a lot of that stuff ends up coming through anyway. So more recently, I've been a lot more, attuned to that and actually taking notes and having time where I can figure out what is it that I'm going through at the moment. Where have I been as a kid? What am I doing now as an adult? And how the artwork brings out a lot of that stuff. So there's a fair amount of time travel that happens.
I like that theme in your work. I watched one of your short videos on YouTube and an artist talk that was on your link tree. So that was good.
Yeah.
Both of those talks. So I love that theme, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But you're not originally from Dallas, are you?
No, originally from South Louisiana.
When did you come to Dallas? What brought you here?
I've been here for a little over 10, 11 years. Before here, we were in Austin for 8 years. So we've been out of Louisiana for almost 20, just working at a few different ad agencies and design studios. And then the artwork kind of started for me in Austin in our garage, which I converted to a studio. And ever since then, I've done studio in-house. And right now I'm in a studio in the Cedars neighborhood, which is perfect because with a lot of my materials, it can get fairly messy. And I used to relegate it to a bedroom, and now I let it spread out into the studio.
I prefer to paint in oil. I've dabbled in watercolor, and I need to explore acrylic more, but that's one of my excuses because my studio is my apartment that I live in. And so that's been my biggest thing that's kind of like holding me back. The biggest excuse is like not wanting to make a mess. So it's really nice to have a space that's dedicated just for that. And you use it as sort of a gallery as well, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I'm fortunate in that I'm in this shared space, but the whole front section of the building is my studio and it's air conditioned. So that's great, especially now. The back section is shared by 6 or 8 ceramic artists. So they've all got all of their, pottery wheels and all of that crazy material back there. But yeah, I take the front part, and having that AC is pretty awesome.
That's great. Have you had any studio visits or shows out of the space?
Yeah, just about every year I participate in the Cedars Open Studios. And that's been going on for probably 20 years, but I've been involved probably the last 5 or 6 years. And this last year was really good because the weather cooperated. And then I decided a few months after that to have an open studio of my own. And that was really good as well. We had a lot of people show up and, had really good conversations. Those are really fun because you're able to really sit back and share with people and you're able to tell the stories about the artwork. And that's one thing that I find it shouldn't surprise me, but it ends up surprising me is how people react when you explain the story or the genesis of a piece of work. Just seeing their eyes light up and then seeing the connection from what I'm saying into the visual of the piece, that for me, that never gets old. I love doing that.
So you love that. That's
Yeah.
that's good. It sounds like you probably have a lot of experience talking about your work and explaining it. That
Yes,
used to be one of my least favorite parts.
me
If
too.
someone Yeah, if someone would ask me what it's about or what does it mean, I saw them light up before I spoke.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to disappoint them,
Mhm.
like I just would prefer to ask them what they thought, and
Yeah,
then there would probably be a tie
sure.
to what I intended, but
Yeah.
so it probably just gets better with practice, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And I find because the nature of my work is becoming more and more personal over time, it's easier to talk about it because it's my story. There can be times where you're dealing with something that might be, not necessarily positive. You can be talking about trauma or past events or things like that. But I find that especially now in the past couple of years since the pandemic, those conversations are so much easier to have now.
I feel like that or this whole period in time has really brought a lot of people together in that way, a shared experience,
Exactly.
depending, like thinking about, you mentioned you're from Louisiana. I can't
Yeah,
help think about Katrina. Everyone from there had a shared experience. And
exactly.
even even people who came to Texas, I don't know if you were part of that or knew anyone who was displaced that way, but
We left Louisiana like literally a month or two before Katrina hit.
wow.
So we were in Austin at the time and we went and volunteered downtown and were able to host people who had come on buses. So because we know what it's like to be in the middle of one. We've had the power out, we've had the trees fall, the leaky
Mhm.
roofs and all of that. So being able to help people who are going through that when you've done it yourself, that was really good for us.
Yeah. So tying it back to just 2020 and COVID
Yeah.
and this, I mean, honestly, just the way that it changed our entire world and how everything
Yep.
works. I mean, we're still navigating that. And so that's a
Yeah.
good point that you bring up, that those conversations are easier to have now. And I think that's a good thing in a way for a lot of people, in a lot of, I say cultures just because I've lived in Texas my whole life and I don't know, but
Yeah.
I feel like it's kind of common in circles that I've run in to not really talk about things. Don't talk about troubles, just stay
Yeah.
positive and don't spotlight it, don't highlight it, and
Right.
don't work through it either. So
Yeah.
that's becoming more of a norm.
And for us artists, I'm sure you've experienced it like a lot of us had, when you're in that place and you're suddenly relegated to your home and you can't really react or interact with other people in close proximity, the creativity for me went through the roof where I just started doing all of these crazy things. And I'm sure it was the same for you, where I just had this period of like creative explosion where it was like I couldn't work fast enough to get out of my head what I was thinking.
If you asked me a couple months ago, I would have said, yeah, I thought I would have gotten a lot of work done, a lot of art done, but I just really didn't. But
Yeah.
in reality, what I did was I explored other things. Like
Nice.
I also play music and am interested in
Hmm.
that. So I played a lot of music at home and just explored different things. I was on Instagram a lot.
Yeah.
So tried some different things. And I have an Instagram for this podcast now too. So I'm still
Yeah.
working on that. And all of that can feed back into the visual art that I do. I'm kind of still easing back into it. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's why I wanted to start conversations like this in my personal life, but also through the podcast. I kind of did that simultaneously. That's kind of one of the goals that I have here, is to
That's
insert
awesome.
myself back into it. Thanks.
Well, thank you for doing it. I'm sure myself, I love the fact that you're doing it, and it gives me a platform to talk about my work. And I'm sure everyone else that you have interviewed so far is probably thinks the same exact thing.
Yeah, thanks. I really love connecting people, and I've I've followed a lot of these people like on social media for a while, or met them through various art events too. So
Right.
just wanting to have those conversations, might as well bring them all together and do something
Exactly.
a little more with it, like step it up a little. So thinking back to when, I guess, you remember first being creative or expressing yourself in that way. What did that look like? How old were you?
Growing up in my home, my mom was an artist, and she still is. She's 91 years old, and she still paints and does commissions. One of my earliest memories is drawing at home, and then also being, I'm the youngest of five siblings, and she wrangled me into being a model for her and her artist friends when I was like 5. And I was the only kid who would sit still long enough to do that. So that's kind of where it started. And then actually doing the artwork, yeah, just drawing as a kid all the time. We'd go in the summer to visit an aunt and uncle of mine in Mississippi, and my uncle was an architect, so he had his own studio in the house. So he had the drawing table and everything, and I was able to spend hours in there drawing and using everything that he had. So that kind of lit the fire as well. And then from there, it was on to high school, took art classes and all of that, and then college. College, I was a business major. I changed my major a couple of times, and my accounting class is what healed me of that. I ended up dropping the class. I got the drop slip and walked into the class on the first day that we had an exam, and handed in my drop slip and never looked back.
And you changed to art then, or
Yeah,
something else?
yeah.
Business.
I
Mhm.
switched to art and had no idea what I was doing. But I was 20 years old at the time, so it was definitely the right decision. I can't imagine myself doing anything else.
I can resonate with that. I went to school for art as well.
Hmm.
And even though it's not what I'm doing for my 9 to 5 right now, I still feel like my experience was very valuable. I learned skills and concepts that I wouldn't have found on my own.
Right.
I know you can teach yourself almost anything nowadays through the internet, YouTube, tutorials
Sure.
and everything, but there was that community aspect of it that
Oh,
I
that's
wouldn't trade
major.
for anything. Yeah, I wouldn't trade it. And live in-person critiques with, in my case, fellow students and professors that I respected and held
Yeah.
very high in regard for their opinions and their
Right.
talents. Yeah,
Yeah. It was
that
just definitely the same for me in art school. And this was back in the 80s. So, some of the critiques could be fairly brutal, where a lot of those, or some of those professors would not be able to teach in today's climate, let's say.
yeah, for a lot of reasons. That's a whole
Yeah.
other story.
But
But
yeah,
yeah.
but it was, I still look back on it with good memories because I learned a lot, and it instilled in me setting a very high bar and not settling for like the first thing you do, or not giving enough effort, or this is good enough. That was all dispelled a long time ago. So I can definitely thank a lot of my professors for that.
How does that translate to your work now? Do you have a hard time knowing when to stop or when is enough?
There are times when I do struggle with that a little bit. The thing I do, there are so many times where what I'm doing is very precise. I'm cutting out specific shapes and things like that. And over time, for me, I'm working close up. So I do find that I have to often take the piece I'm working on and either hang it on a wall and back up from it, or go and put it on the floor and stand on a stool and look down on it so that I get kind of that wider view. The idea of when a piece is finished, it's not as big a deal as it used to be for me. I used to obsess over that kind of thing, but a find over time as my work gets more and more loose and abstract that it's more, I'm basing more of my decisions on my feelings and my gut now, which it took me a while to get to that point. And I think the precision aspect of it, thinking about it now, was maybe like a safety net for me. It's like, hey, I've got the patience to cut out, 3,000 objects. Okay, that's cool. But putting it into a piece of work and having it resonate with viewers, that's a whole different thing. But yeah, I do find that now, moving forward, it's getting a lot more loose and abstract and a lot more visceral in the feeling aspect, which I love. So, but I still dip back into that other part because I find I can go into 10 to 20 different directions at any moment. I've got buckets of directions that I have all of my elements in. And I'm very ADD, where I'll go down a certain path. And then once I've done a few pieces, I kind of get it out of my system and then I move on to the next thing. My plan overall is to go back to some of those places that I've started and really go back and mine deeper in those different areas to see what comes of it.
Kind of alluding more to the detail of the materials that you work with. You work with different magazines and different print,
Sure.
but a lot of it's vintage, right?
Yes. Yeah, the
So,
majority of it is.
yeah, so it's not like you can just go find, unless it's an advertisement that was widely used,
Right.
you can't really just find another one. Like if you cut out this
Yeah. Yeah.
automobile and it took forever, you can't just like
No,
find that same one.
unless you've scanned it or photographed it, you're kind of out of luck.
Hmm.
But yeah, most of my stuff is vintage, and it's been collected over years. But I'll occasionally use newer things if I'm looking for something that's like a specific color or something like that. I'll kind of jump around between decades, which is fine. Overall, though, I do love the weathered aspect of older paper because there is that, the vignetting that happens on white paper where it turns this nice beige around the edges. I could technically fake that with, paint or airbrush or whatever, but it's not the same as the real thing. So,
Here's another like micro detail because I haven't been able to see your work in person yet. How are you finishing off the collage? I mean, a lot of people like put some resin or Mod Podge on
yeah.
top. You're doing that? Okay.
Yeah, I am. I use a dull varnish, normally a couple of coats, just to protect it. I'm not a fan of a high shine unless I'm trying to show some kind of a contrast, maybe between a background and a foreground element. But for the most part, it's dull varnish so that you can't tell there's anything on it.
I thought I would ask because you were talking about the texture of the paper.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so I could see, depending on what materials you lose, that being
yes.
used, that being lost.
Right.
So
Yeah. And that is something where there are times when people don't realize they think that what I'm doing is digital and I'm just printing it out. And until they can get up and look at it closely, or if I show detail shots where you can see, shadow and things like that in different textures, maybe that's springs from the perfectionist in me, trying to make sure everything feels just really clean.
yeah, and it's the designer too.
Exactly.
It's just
Yeah.
part of you.
It is. It is. I float back and forth on any given evening between designer and artist.
Yeah. They can coexist hand in
Yeah.
hand. That's not really what it's about though. I mean, people ask if it's digital. I
Yeah.
would ask if you've ever tried that, but
Mhm.
it sounds like you have more of a connection with the process of the authentic pieces that you find and collect and
Yes.
work
Yeah.
with and spend time with.
There's definitely that focus. But most days I'm on the computer, in my day job doing Photoshop and all of that kind of stuff. And I've done digital collages and I still do them once in a while, depending on the materials I have or the idea that I have. And I also use Photoshop as a test bed to do mock-ups to see if an idea works, see if I can get something to look the way I want it to look, and then recreate that by hand.
You mentioned time travel being a big theme of your art. Can you tell us a little more about that?
For me, it's been a theme since childhood where first of all, I was always a fan of sci-fi movies and shows. And as a kid, pre-cable, those inevitably played late at night on a channel that we could barely catch. So there was always this aspect of, we had one of those old school rotors where you uh, turn the direction based on the channel you're trying to catch, and it would take your antenna outside and turn the antenna. There was also a time where we did it by hand and whoever was watching TV had to scream at us outside, clear, not clear. But there was something about that as a kid that has stuck with me as an adult, where there's science fiction, monsters, all of these things that, are they real or are they not? And then there's the aspect, of course, of time travel. So I've always imagined when I'm in a house or in a neighborhood, what life was like, decades past. What were these people like when they were kids, or when I was a kid? When I'm growing up in South Louisiana, what did these kids in Chicago do at that time? So I feel my brain has always traveled back and forth. And as I do the artwork that I'm doing, because of that older nature of a lot of the paper, that's kind of inherent in the process. But there are times where the subject matter itself is also playing a part in that. So there are layers of meaning, layers of, color, black and white. And I find that for me, I'm constantly processing stuff from childhood, things that didn't necessarily phase me then, that as I think back to them as an adult, I see different aspects of how I grew up, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm able to now tell stories that speak back to that kid. And it's almost like I'm doing therapy on myself as a child, but then I'm also looking into the present and in the future of what it's going to be like, when I'm older. So I feel like I'm constantly traveling back and forth. And there's something about time. We experience it in a linear fashion, but I love the fact that I can explore a non-linear version of it, maybe through wormholes or whatever that is.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it sounds like you're getting a lot out of it. Do you know when you first started to do that? Is there a before and after when you were working with this collage art
You know,
that you
when I
started to do
first,
that?
yeah, when I first started, it was all about the old paper and the old images. I was looking for that aesthetic because at that time, that was a huge thing for me. I had discovered a few collage artists that I really started to admire. And I was like, okay, I'm going to begin by emulating these people to get a feel for it and then go off on my own. And that happened pretty fast. And I am still a fan of the older materials. But like I said earlier, I am also mixing in newer stuff. And it's really all dependent on what a particular piece of art is calling for. I feel like they're speaking to me, telling me I need older, I need newer, I need a mixture of both. And I try to just keep my mind open to that because there are so many times when I can get so into the process where everything else, I'm not thinking about anything else but what I'm doing. And that can be good, but it can also be a negative if you don't stop once in a while and step back and look at the piece and see if it's resonating with you in the way that you originally intended. I'm having that conversation with myself constantly. It's like, yeah, there's the old, there's the new, and there's everything in between. And then there's the stuff that's off in the future that I'm trying to articulate as well sometimes. That's how I feel like time works for me. I'm constantly moving between the past, present, future.
Like you mentioned before, you're kind of self-therapizing as
Yes,
well and working through it. Sort of, you're probably reliving it too, which
definitely.
is a really interesting idea.
And it's amazing for me, especially. There have been many, many, many times where, as I'm working on something, I'm not experiencing anything but the physical act of making the piece. And then I reach a point where I'm starting to see things in the piece that subconsciously I must have put there for a particular reason. And things start to dawn on me. And there have been so many times where I've been like heavily surprised by what I came up with and how closely that relates to something that happened to me in the past.
So, moving from like the concept and the ideas behind what you're doing and what you're experiencing while you're doing it, going to more of the physical process. You have a very specific process, and a lot of that is a part of the whole point of what you're doing. If you had to change anything, any part of your process, what are some things that you would be okay with changing, and what are some non-negotiables for you?
The main thing I'm doing now is I'm a sponge visually. So I'm constantly looking at things from a different perspective, I think, than a lot of people do. And looking at photos and images, taking photos and images with my phone and cataloging those and keeping those in a place on an app where I can pull up all these ideas that these things around the world influence me. So I'm constantly looking at visual artists, photographers and artists, and I'm constantly influenced by them. And then outside of that, just the outside world. Anytime we travel, like recently went with my family to Italy. So, a whole other place to look at things that are different from the US. And in the past, when we would go on trips, I'd be taking photos of all these weird things, and my wife would get aggravated with me because I wasn't taking pictures of us and the kids. Now she just understands and she goes with it. She realizes and she sees how it helps me. So there's always that visual influx. I feel like I'm a sponge, and I'm keeping all these things either in my head, on my phone, or in drawers or cubby holes in my studio. So the more of that I have, it makes it more fun. One thing that I feel like I realized about my work is the vast majority of the materials I use, I already have in my studio. There are certain times where I'm looking for something specific and I don't have it and I have to go out and find it. So whether that's a garage sale, estate sale, or getting on eBay or wherever to find a specific thing. And I've done that, and that's great. But 9 times out of 10, I have an idea and I need these certain elements, and I have something of what I need in the studio. So it's good to know that. And it just helps because there are so many times when I'm in the moment working, if I have to stop, get online, order something and wait a few days for it to come in, that for me is so many times not an option, because I feel like I'll lose it and I won't be in the same place when that piece comes in.
Mm.
So finding it in the studio, I feel like that's still a really good thing for me. And that's something that won't change, is having a lot of material on hand. From an outsider looking at my studio, you would say it's a mess. And it is, but it's kind of a visual representation, I think, of my brain, which there is an organization to it, but you might not be able to see it on the surface.
Yeah, it's organized chaos.
Yes.
I love what you said about not taking pictures of the right thing. When I was little and we went on vacation, I think my grandparents would give us all a disposable camera. My mom would scold me because I was taking pictures of rocks and twigs. And so when we got back home and developed it, all of my pictures were like the
Yeah.
ground or this wall or tree or something. But we're the same kind of weird in that way.
Oh yeah. To me, that's a lot of times way more interesting. Now,
Yeah.
I do find my kids and my wife extremely interesting. And especially now that my kids are grown, it is fun taking pictures of them because they are pretty weird, which is great.
My uncle and I would, on the same trips, maybe he encouraged this. I think I did this before he enlisted my help, but he was specifically looking for like a new screensaver for his work
All right.
computer. So we were always like looking at different like textures.
Yep.
So he's the
That's
same
awesome.
kind of weird too. So some of the rhythms and processes are related to the materials that you have and
Yes.
what's on hand versus what you can afford to
Right.
take time to go find.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of sketching in my sketchbooks, figuring out ideas, coming up with an idea, sketching something out to see if I can generally make it work, or turn it into something concrete. And then it's like, okay, now I have this thing that I can follow. That happens a lot, but there are also times where I'm working in the moment really fast so that my subconscious mind kicks in because I find that my conscious mind a lot of time sabotages me where I'm trying to make something too perfect. And I find that there are times where I'll purposely set before me a whole table full of small canvases or book covers, old book covers, and use those as canvases. And then I'll take a lot of my material, and I have material separated by color. And then I also have subject matter in different areas. So I'll pull out piles of different colors, different subject matter and textures, and force myself to only choose from those. So it's the idea of thinking inside the box instead of thinking outside the box, which a lot of times inside the box for me gives me more options because it focuses my mind. Because I find that there are times when if you're given carte blanche to do what you want to do, it can be freeing, but it can also be paralyzing where it's like, well, if I can do anything, that sounds awesome. But I find that when I'm given parameters, more interesting stuff comes out. you know?
Yeah, I think we're more creative when we have restrictions
Yeah.
and limitations.
Yes.
That can be very important too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it reminds me of an art challenge that one of my friends, who I also interviewed, Bree Smith,
Yeah.
she was doing an art challenge where she kept going back to the store to get more materials. And then she said, I have so much in my studio already.
Yeah.
Let me just work with what I have. And
Yep.
she's been having fun with it and
Oh,
coming
yeah.
up with some really great stuff. So
That's awesome.
that's probably a good point to transition to how you found Art House Dallas. When
Yeah.
did you find them and when did you start participating in some of the things that they do?
When we first moved to Dallas, we were living up in Plano because our youngest, we had twins that were in high school. And when we moved here, we started in Plano until they graduated. Once they graduated and moved off into their first apartment, we headed down into Dallas. But while up there, a friend of mine, we just started hanging out, and he told me about Art House, and I had no idea what it was here in Dallas. I had heard about the original one started by Charlie Peacock and his wife, you know, probably 20 years ago. I remember hearing about it and had no idea we had one here. So once I knew that, I was like, well, I'm in, let's go. So just started attending the meetings and volunteering and being a part of the discussions there. And then at some point was able to start actually showing work. And they've been such a good source for that. The idea of talking about your work, like you were saying at the beginning, where it can be a challenging thing to do. It's like every time they ask me to do anything where I'm showing my work or talking about my work, I say yes, no matter what it is, because I find the more you do it, the better you get at it, and the more connections you make. When you're talking to people about your work, it's again, like we said before, you see that light bulb go off in their head when you're telling them the story behind a piece. So I found that that's really, really helpful. And just the idea of artists, writers, theater people having a place where they can get together, not feel crazy, have an audience of people who are like-minded, where you're able to share your ideas in a space that's safe. During COVID, we would do these artist groups where everyone was on Zoom and a couple people would come in and show stuff that they were working on, kind of workshop. Here's some sketches, here's some studies I've done, and you get feedback from everyone. And out of that, I've gotten at least 2 or 3 directions in my work that started in those meetings that then I fleshed out afterwards and they took off. So just having that space where you can show your stuff to someone, get feedback, get realization that you're not crazy, that's a valuable
Yes.
thing.
That's one of the biggest parts, just knowing that we're not crazy.
Yeah.
It's the
Oh, yeah.
most valuable piece.
I think so.
In this next year, is there anything with Art House or otherwise that you're looking forward to? Any shows or things that you're participating in?
I've shown my work a couple of different times in Fort Worth. And through that and through the other art fair, when the other art fair came to Dallas the first time, 2 or 3 years ago, I did that first show. And I met this woman who owns a gallery in Fort Worth. She also owns an advertising agency. And we struck up a conversation, and she ended up buying work from me. And I was able to show work at her place. And then over time, I was like, look, you know a lot of gallery people, you know artwork, you know all of it. Would you consider like repping me? Because I've never had that before. And she agreed. So we just started this a couple of months ago, and we're still kind of feeling our way, or at least I know I am. She knows what she's doing. But for me, that's helping me stay on top of my game, where as an artist, there's the doing the work, and then there's the sharing it. And the sharing it can become overwhelming with social media and all of that when you're trying to sell your work, trying to get it in front of as many people as possible. So I find that having someone like that helps to keep me on a path. Like, here's some deadlines. You need to have this done by this date. That's for me invaluable, because I'll procrastinate with the best of them if I don't have something like that to have a structure for me. So with that in mind, my next thing is to try to get a solo show with some of the pieces that I've been creating most recently. So I've been doing a series that I've done a crazy amount of pieces, and it's all very, very personal, relating to childhood. And I haven't even considered, I don't think yet, selling any of it, but it could get to that point. But I'm saying all that to say that this involves three-dimensional stuff, 3D printing, building giant props and things like that. And it's overwhelming to think about, but I think it's something I really want to do, because it would tell this story that I'm trying to tell, this particular story, one of many. And just having someone like that to help navigate that scene, for me, I feel is going to be invaluable.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of that.
A lot of work has come out of it, but now it's trying to figure out how to tell that whole story, because I feel like so far I've told maybe half of it, and there's a whole other three-dimensional part that I'm still trying to wrap my head around, that involves physical pieces as well as 3D things done on the computer and then converted to augmented reality and bringing the three-dimensional computer generated stuff into a physical space, but then also with actual physical things. So it's a lot to think about, but I feel like I'll get there.
Let me know if you need help. I'll help install. Sounds very exciting.
Careful what you ask for.
Yeah. So is your work on display at this Fort Worth gallery right now?
No, not right now. They have a lot of rotating works that happen there. The place where you can see my work most often is in the Cedars at Full City Rooster, the coffee shop. Michael Wyatt, from the beginning, when I first met Michael, even before we moved to Dallas from Plano, he's always been such an advocate for me. He allows me to just hang whatever I want in his place, but he's always one of those who has a good eye for art, and he'll curate shows within the coffee shop. And then he'll also bring the neighborhood together, which I feel is such a great thing for the Cedars. It's a neighborhood that's really experiencing a renaissance, and I hope that the developers don't get carried away and tear down too many homes and build too many McMansions. But with that, I find that I love the neighborhood because my studio's there, and it's a quick trip from home there. It's only like a 5-minute drive. And just being in that space and in that atmosphere, for me, is like it gives me a jolt, because I feel like I'm surrounded by like-minded people. It feels like what my artwork feels like. It's can be old, can be kind of funky and weird, and that's kind of what the Cedars is, which I love.
Yeah. That's awesome. I went to school near Houston, and there's a couple of places that are funky like that that
Exactly.
come to mind. That's where the community is, right?
Exactly.
It embodies everyone who's a part of it. So
Yeah.
So on the topic of selling your art, getting it in front of as many people as possible, you've worked with the gallery a little bit, hopefully more in the future. I saw that you sell your art on a few different websites. Society 6 and Saatchi was what I saw. Is there anywhere else?
I have it on my website, first of all. I've got work on Saatchi as well, and I've sold pieces to people around the country there. Society 6 was more of a new thing, like an experiment where I wanted to see if I could take a subset of my work and start to license it. But I found out that, I guess like a lot of artists, just how much work it takes to do that, but also how hard it is to actually get eyeballs onto your work there. So unless you're a really well-known artist, you're in a sea of, 100,000 other artists. So it's like finding a needle in a haystack. So for me personally, it hadn't worked yet, and I haven't really put much time in it lately. But my website has been great. Instagram has been great. I've thrown stuff up just to see what people thought of it and have people message me saying, I want that piece. It's like, okay.
Wow.
And then there's another online marketplace called Westcover that they cater to interior designers and people, regular consumers also. And it includes visual art like mine, but it also includes furniture makers, interior designers, woodworkers, all these different aspects of creativity. And I've had a few people reach out and almost sold two. So I have hope for it.
Yeah.
Because I love that aspect of it. If I can get in front of interior designers, I love that. That and curators and people who will do kind of the searching and the curating for businesses or homes. I've done a few commission pieces through those kinds of folks. And the more contacts I get like that, the better, because I love creating my work from scratch for me and then having someone love it and buy it. That's incredible in one way. And then I also love working on commissions where they're looking for something in general in a direction. I can do a mock-up, show them what it will look like, and then once it's approved, just dive in and really go to town on it. So I feel like I've got multiple plates spinning, and that's fun. And then whichever ones are working for me, I'll keep spinning them. The other ones, if they don't work, I'll just let those kind of spin off and fall away.
And is that what you recommend to people?
I think so. For me, it helps. Just my wife was a realtor a few years back, and she had to operate by that same mentality. You're constantly working these different properties and all this stuff. And when you're doing all of that, things start to happen. So for me, I find when I'm working on all these different avenues for my work, it's fun. I used to find it challenging, and I thought it was the more unimportant part of the process. But now I'm finding that it's a very important part of it. And now I try to make it fun and have everything kind of work together. So the creating of the work, the sharing it on social media, the putting it out in different areas to see which audiences resonate with work. It's all a learning process still for me, but it's fun. And, whatever works, I keep going in that direction. Whatever doesn't work, that kind of goes away.
How long have you been showing on those different platforms? I mean, you've had your website probably the whole time you've been working.
Yeah, probably 10 or so years.
And things change all the time, like
God.
social media and
Yes.
algorithms and everything.
Yes, definitely.
I remember a time when Etsy was newer, and there's a very specific like market for Etsy, right? So it's for some people and it's not for other people. But I remember when I was graduating from school,
Mm-hmm.
and Etsy came up in conversation, my professors were like, do not put anything on Etsy. Don't do that. And we were graduating with a Bachelor of Fine Arts,
Sure.
targeting galleries,
Yep.
and maybe exclusivity was a part of the concern.
Yeah.
But my perspective has shifted, and Etsy has shifted a ton too. There's a lot of original fine artists selling originals and prints on Etsy. It's the similar mindset that you're describing of just whatever works, like put it here, put it there. If it works, then who cares?
Yeah, exactly. And I've had stuff on Etsy in the past when I would do prints and things like that, and it worked okay. But again, it wasn't the thing. The artwork I was creating for that wasn't the thing I was most excited about. So that just kind of withered away. And now I sell the majority of my stuff through my website right now. And then in person, whenever I do a show or things like that, I'm constantly meeting new people. And one thing that helps is I'm constantly keeping an email database. Every time I have a show, I'll get people to sign up for it. And it's like, it's slow, steady process of getting a bigger and bigger database. But I do find when I send emails out that the open rate is extremely good because it's people who are interested in it.
I want to ask you more about that. So
Yeah.
you go to a show, you have a little booklet, people sign it, put their
Yep.
email in there. How else do you get emails?
I mean, for me, the thing that helps is I'll always have a small piece that I give away as a prize. So it's
Yeah.
basically if you sign up for my newsletter, you get a chance to win this. And
Mhm.
that'll pull people in.
Like a raffle. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's cool.
Yeah. And
And
that's
then,
helped a lot, definitely.
yeah. And when you send emails out, is it consistent? Is it like a monthly newsletter? Is it kind of sporadic?
It's consistent ish. I'll average about once a month or so. For me, it's always a matter of what the subject matter is, the story I'm telling. So I'm talking about things I'm working on, things that are upcoming, a show I'll be in, a new series I've started, behind the scenes type stuff. And I find that when I do that, I get into it and it's fun to relay those stories, but it takes work and time. So if I was trying to do an email a week, there's no way I could keep up with that.
No.
Plus, I feel like I would inundate people with too much and I would get people dropping off. So that's one thing is I try not to hit people often. Like once a month is
Yeah.
about as much as I want to do because I
Quality
know
over
what it's like.
quantity, right?
Yeah, I know what it's like getting inundated with email. And that's the last thing I want to do is be that guy.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just our entire existence now, like our
Yeah.
email, our social
Yep.
media, our phones,
Yes,
constant connection,
exactly.
constant
And that's where,
disruption.
yeah, that's for me, that's where going into the studio and doing physical work is incredible. It helps me to stay sane, basically.
Maybe to wrap it up and come to a close, is there any other advice or just something that you think other artists need to hear when it comes to getting started, trying to find success, trying to even learn what success looks like? What
Yeah.
is something that you've learned or resonates with you that you think people need to hear?
The biggest thing I've learned in the past probably 5 years has been I am my audience, first and foremost. The work I do it to make me happy. I do work where the subject matter is stuff that interests me. The visual direction is something that interests me. The story I'm telling is my story. And I'm finding that the more I'm able to do that and not worry about sales, the sales happen. Because, like I said before, when I'm able to create a piece that's personal and then tell someone the story behind that piece, it takes interest level from here to here immediately. And people are just, it's almost like they're waiting to hear a story, you know, and I'm able to tell it. And I know the more it goes, the more I'm learning how unique my life is and my life experiences. There's no one else like me, just like there's no one else like you. So the more I lean into that, the weirder it gets, but the better it gets. So
I
yeah,
like that.
yeah, I feel like it's I read Rick Rubin's book on creativity, which is a crazy fun read. Of course, he's a world renowned music producer, and everything I read in his book I already knew, but it was great to read it and to just read it back to myself. And that was
Yeah.
one of the main things was don't do the work for someone else. Do the work for you, and the right people will come. You'll get
Mhm.
your own audience basically, as opposed to trying to make everyone happy. That's
Yeah.
never going to work. Doesn't work in music. Doesn't work in movies. I've seen crappy movies because of that, and you can have crappy art because you're just trying to follow a trend. You know?
Mhm.
And that to me is death.
Good point. Good advice. Thanks for that.
Yeah, I mean I've done it. I've been guilty of it. So
Yeah, and it doesn't work.
no,
You know better now.
yeah, I mean it's okay earlier when you're younger. If you're trying to emulate someone, do it. emulate those people, steal from them. And I mean, steal in the right way, figure out styles and things based on the people you like. And then you end up becoming good at it, but you bring your own version to it, so it's always going to be you. And it's, another quote from someone else. It's Ira Glass. He talked about, you come in as an artist and you have this level of taste that's up here. You like good stuff. And then you start doing the thing you're doing and you suck at it. The level I want is here and my ability is not even in the frame. But over time, you keep working on it and you get there. And that's how good artwork overall happens. Good artwork, good music, good movies, good whatever. You shoot for that level in your head that you're trying to go for. And I know in my head, the level I'm going for is so far beyond what I'm able to do right now. Still, I'll never get there, but that's okay. It's a fun spaceship to chase.
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining me today, Glen. We could talk forever, I'm sure.
Oh my gosh.
And we will. I'll see you at an event and meet you in person, see your art in person, and it'll be great. But
thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's been fun talking. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much. Hopefully your editing skills are pretty good, right?
Not at all. You didn't ramble at all. But I guess, so I have a lot of your information to add to the show notes, but for our listeners, where are some places that they can find your work for those who are listening?
The main places online are my website, glengauthier.com, and then my Instagram account, Glen Gauthier. Very easy to find. I've got those other places that I sell work, but I find that if you just come to my place, it's a better experience.
Yeah. And on your Instagram, you have your link tree as well. So it'll take you to the other places too.
Which once this thing's done, this is going on the link tree, that's for sure.
All right. Okay. No pressure. Thanks so much, Glen. Have a great evening.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you have not already, I would love if you could leave us a rating and give some feedback on today's episode. Do you have any questions for Glen that we weren't able to answer? Please let us know in the comments below. You can find Glen on Instagram at Glen Gauthier and glengauthier.com. I'll share these and other various links in the show notes below.